to Thriller Bitcoin. Welcome to Thriller Bitcoin.
So macro, is that a thing?
I guess like technically it's a thing. I don't know, man. I just kind of, I guess I kind of got into it just because it seemed like kind of a hot button topic lately with, the massive amounts of money printing and the crazy monetary policy we've seen these past couple of years. So, yeah, I mean, I guess sort of a thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I was reading your Green Candle. For people that don't know, Brandon does the excellent newsletter called greencandleinvestments.substack.com. Definitely check it out. You released your 2023 macro predictions. But Brandon, for the average pleb out there that's listening, we're not really paying attention to this kind of stuff. Like, what do you think's going on with the Fed and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, man, I know. So it's interesting because, you bring up what is macro, right? And it's like the average pleb doesn't maybe not pay attention to it, but the average pleb should be aware of it, I guess is what maybe not fully dive into it and kind of go on that because obviously, Bitcoin's got the fundamentals and everything. But I think, the saying that goes around Twitter and everything, fix the money, fix the world, right? So you kind of have to understand now, what the current issues with the monetary policy are in order to understand Bitcoin, or at least, why Bitcoin could potentially fix some of those issues that are out there. So, I think there's a lot of cogs into it. And one of the big issues right now is that, we have the Fed, the Federal Reserve, the entire globe's on the US dollar monetary policy. Obviously, the US dollar is the global reserve currency. Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Fed, essentially has all the power in the world, right? So the entire stock market, housing market, everything has become so volatile that he can just go into any one of these Fed's meetings and just throw out a little hint that he's maybe going to slow down raising interest rates or he's going to speed it up or whatever, and the market swings in one direction or the other.
Wow.
And this is a guy who's an unelected official. So, I mean, put politics aside, he was put in office by Trump, and now he's, here through Biden as well. So, I mean, he's been on both parties, and, it's essentially something where he's supposed to be an unbiased member of the government, but it seems like, at this point, it's kind of hard to separate both politics and this monetary policy, especially with everything that's gone on the past couple of years. So, I think the average pleb maybe shouldn't pay attention to it to try to time the market, I guess, if that makes sense. So it's I always tell people when they try to get into Bitcoin, the easiest way is to DCA and chill. Just, buy a little bit for whatever you can sustain every single day, so you're not trying to time it. But a lot of these macro events affect the overall market, which affect the price to the US dollar exchange rate for Bitcoin, which in turn kind of affects Bitcoin businesses or businesses that are related to Bitcoin. So as much as some people kind of want to avoid it, it's all kind of interconnected in some way, shape, or form. But, I'm a Bitcoiner through and through. So I do think that, eventually taking the power away from the people and kind of leaving it, a free and open market will kind of be, the way to go in the future. But as it stands right now, there's people kind of pulling the cogs and, pulling some strings right now in the overall macro environment.
Yeah. And you mentioned Jerome Powell. I think he's an interesting fellow, right? Because didn't he come from, was it?
I want to say he's like a lawyer or something. Like he's not really, he's not like a lifelong politician or a lifelong, person that's kind of been in this industry like a lot of politicians, for example, or maybe some other people, or some academics or anything. Like he's kind of had his time, working in the real world and kind of seeing how real world things work. Which I think that experience is pretty valuable. Jerome Powell, he has his critics, right? And I mean, everybody can play Monday morning quarterback, look back at the job he did. Maybe he should have started raising rates earlier. So for the plebs out there that might not know, right? So the Federal Reserve controls interest rates, which is essentially like the amount of money that can be lent out by, I guess, to dumb it down really easily, that central banks can lend it out, right? So, at the end of the day, he has the ability to raise and lower these interest rates. And so the overall economy was ripping and roaring through 2020, but it's actually kind of showed a little chinks in the armor come like 2018, 2019 time. So right before, this COVID 2020 boom. And Powell tried to raise the interest rates a little bit during that time, but was met with a lot of backlash. And so, once he tried that, he just lowered them. And we had this period of decade where interest rates were essentially at zero. And so COVID obviously broke out, shut down the entire global economy. And the Federal Reserve went through a process called QE, which many, Bitcoiners know is just printing money, right? We've all seen the GIF of Jerome Powell just shooting off dollars out of the money gun and everything like that. So, obviously they printed a shit ton of money and just put it all into the ecosystem. And as the global reserve currency, that devalued the dollar significantly. And so what interest rates do is it kind of makes that money a little bit harder to come by, right? So if there's a 0% interest rate, essentially you could just loan it out and you get 2% back. You're getting 2% back better on the money that you got before. So you get that money for very cheap. You don't have to pay high interest rates. So this is where we kind of ran into the environment where a lot of maybe it's growth companies, whether it's, it kind of helped attribute to the crypto boom, I think, in my opinion, where a lot of these companies, like you look at, BlockFi, FTX, some of the ones that recently failed and blew up instantly. We had companies go from non-existent to multi-billion-dollar valuations very quickly. That's because, they had such easy access to capital. They had a lot of they had a low barrier to entry. They had a lot of money that they could just grab on at one point in time. And if you get enough marketing dollars behind something, people are going to kind of jump on board. So, that's kind of what happened, I think, here is like a lot of these industries and a lot of side industries to Bitcoin kind of blew up and kind of, allowed people to create some companies that were either, fraudulent or just kind of, theoretically were making a lot of money or were going to plan on making a lot of money in the future. They had it all lined out. Then the Fed realized like, hey, we devalued the dollar significantly by doing all this money printing in 2020. So we need to start raising interest rates, and raising interest rates makes money a little bit tighter. So if a company is not really making any money, they don't have the ability to really borrow like they did in this decade long of growth. And so, if the company's not making money, they gotta figure out how to make some cuts because, obviously if they're not making money, then they're losing money, the company's bleeding, right? They got to figure out a way how to solve that. And so, what we're kind of seeing right now is that a lot of companies are either going under because, they shot up and they borrowed a lot of money on the backs of nothing, like FTX borrowing a lot of money on the back of their, made up and inflated token. Or you're seeing a lot of companies that, just grew and had a lot of fluff, like a lot of these tech companies. You look at like Google, Facebook, Meta now, Twitter, and a lot of these other companies. that blew up, but now are cutting significant amount of jobs and maybe doing like share buybacks or other things like that to try to value up their stock price. So, we saw a period of significant growth where everybody was making money. You could throw money wherever you wanted, stock market, real estate, shit coins, whatever. You're going to make money somehow, some way. And if you're not getting 20, 30% returns, you look like an idiot. But, in reality, that, 7 to 10% is pretty good, right? So we're seeing the Fed kind of continue to tighten. That's going to mean more pain for the rest of this year. Unfortunately, I mean, it's going to mean that businesses that really don't have a strong backing or aren't really making too much, aren't really making any money, or maybe don't have a great product, it's going to make them in a bit of trouble here for 2023, unfortunately. But I think on the back of that, there is a lot of companies that come out of a recession that, or an economic downturn, however you want to word it, that are really strong and will prosper to come out of it. So I think, now is a really important time to just take a look at, not only like companies' balance sheets and their products and other thing too, but just see how they're run and how efficiently they're run, CapEx expenditures and all that kind of thing. So I'm throwing around a lot of jargon.
No, I mean, everything that you're like describing right now is literally what I'm hearing from these other Bitcoin companies, right? Because there's companies that we know of that have disclosed that they laid off people. Unchained Capital is one of them. I forget who the other big company that shared. I'm trying to remember what I can share and can't share. So there's been companies that have shared that they laid off people. Them being one of them. A lot of friends, man. It sucks because a lot of them are friends, that don't have jobs right now. There's other companies that haven't disclosed currently right now in the Bitcoin space that they had to lay off people, but it's a significant amount, and people would be surprised the name of those. And I think you hit it right on the head at the end where you said people are going to have to reassess how they're valuing their ARR, right? And what the burn is, and then being able to optimize for just staying alive because of what you said. I mean, it was like the FTX crypto thing really screwed over a lot of people. It really did. And it permeated in the space, just like, taking investor calls and stuff, you realize how much of a backlash that has gotten to the rest of these companies that are trying to raise right now. It's unfortunate.
Yeah. And I mean, like, obviously what FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried did was extremely fraudulent, but I think it's just kind of a result of the time that we were in, unfortunately. Like I was saying, I mean, you think that FTX would be able to get that much money that they got for marketing dollars to get people like Tom Brady to jump on board when if we were kind of in the bear market that we're in right now? I mean, I personally don't think so. I mean, we look at either NFL players or other things like that. Now, last year or 2 years ago when Bitcoin and everything was ripping in the exchange rate, you heard about it all in the news. XYZ player in whatever professional league is taking, 90% of their salary or all of their sponsorship monies now in Bitcoin. And have you heard anything about that all of 2022? I mean, I personally haven't. And I usually just, that's what I do for my State of Bitcoin show, just kind of keep up with the news and everything like that. So, I think like a lot of, not only people, it was like investors, it was, angel investors, it was, banks or whatever companies. All these people were just seeing like, hey, this crypto thing, I don't really understand it, but there's got to be something to it. So I'm just going to throw a shit ton of money on it and then figure it out later. When in reality, there really wasn't any basis behind it. So, it's unfortunate that it's kind of leaked over into the Bitcoin space because, obviously there's a lot of Bitcoin companies out there that are doing great things like Unchained Capital and
right.
Some for sure. But, I think just the education standpoint is kind of lacking from the Bitcoin and crypto from the average Joe, I would say. And even, the wealthy billionaires or whatever you want to say, these hedge fund accounts or whatever investors that are investing and kind of backing a lot of these companies, even if they have a company that they really, really believe in, they're just going to have a little bit more trouble getting, all this money and helping get funding for, great ideas and or great companies, even if they're just kind of starting off the ground. So it is a tough time, but I mean, like I said, I think we'll be able to look back at this time in 5 or 6 years. It's like, hey, XYZ company was able to raise during 2023 when it was a bear market. Bitcoin wasn't really ripping, and they were building an outstanding product or service or both. And now they're prospering during the next bull run. But then that all leads to management during the bull runs too, because I think a lot of companies didn't really position themselves correctly during that bull run, and that's where we kind of see it leak over in the Bitcoin mining space too, with this depressed Bitcoin price. So I think just like, I don't know, I'm kind of going all over the place, but a lot of these industries are hurting, and it is unfortunate that it's kind of related to the Bitcoin price, because I think so much revolves around that. And I think as much as the plebs don't want to admit it, there's Bitcoin miners, there's all these other companies that, hey, you get paid in Bitcoin. That's great, right? I mean, you save that 3% fee, but if the exchange rate falls, and you need to sell for some reason to cover your expenses, it can be tough. I mean, eventually, if you get paid 100% in Bitcoin, you either have to find, somewhere in your supply chain, make sure that they all accept Bitcoin, or you're going to have to sell to get US dollars. And if that doesn't go as smoothly as it has been in the past or during the bull run, that's going to hurt the bottom line of the company, at least initially.
Yeah, I know, you hit it again. That's wise words from you, Brandon. There's also, like you described, Meta and some of these other companies like Google, and laying off people as well. And the interesting thing with that is, like, they call that trimming the fat, right? Like, whenever they're describing it, like Elon said, but then you look at Twitter and it completely is broken. I mean, it's working, but it's like barely working as far as like functionality. And now we're seeing like Nostr kind of take over and fill in a lot of those gaps with like just new ideas around what a social platform could look like. I'm wondering, I think my biggest wonder is, like, do those companies make it out of this kind of like 2023, 2024, the bigger tech conglomerates? Do you think they make it out of this? Or you think, it's like business as usual for them?
Yeah, like, look, I mean, Twitter, I think, is going to be fine at the end of the day. They got such a big platform. Elon bought it at like an extremely overvalued price, which I don't think really helped the bottom line of the business. But I think like what he was trying to do is essentially expose that there's a lot of bots and that there's censorship and other things like that too behind it. But, I think like these big tech guys, they're going to make it out, right? I mean, Google essentially is a verb at this point. Like, if you don't know something, somebody will tell you Google it instead of like go look it up. So, I mean, like, I think some of these big players are going to make it out of this initial thing. But, if you look back like 20, 30 years, some of the biggest companies that were, valued at that time don't even really exist anymore, or you don't really hear from them. So I don't think that they're going to go away necessarily, but I don't think that they're going to be the giants of the next 2 decades. I think maybe Amazon's positioned well enough with AWS, but there's a lot of competitors now for AWS. So a lot of people are seeing like some of these big tech companies, and they're like saying, like, exactly like you said, like Twitter with Nostr, like, hey, we could do something better. So they'll make a competitor to take out one of these main, I guess, niche aspects of the company. And the company is so diversified that, that it's not able to sustain that one area of revenue. But, when it comes to a lot of these tech guys, they do have, basically one major source of revenue when it all comes down to it. So like Google, for example, is the ads. So most companies are kind of cutting their marketing spend right now. And that's one of the big things. So Google's revenue is going to go down. I mean, it's just plain and simple. Same thing with Meta. Facebook took a big hit when Apple made that one disclosure where it's like, hey, you can allow your app to track every other thing that you go on, or you can ask it to not track anymore. So how much that really cut off, I don't really know, but theoretically, Apple has all that data now opposed to Facebook. So maybe Apple can undercut Facebook. And then same thing, like you said, with Nostr. Like, I mean, Twitter is bleeding. Elon's very, very open about, Twitter not really making money. And there's a lot of companies out there that don't really agree with, what Elon's stance is on free speech or other things like that too. And, like you said, it's not really working that great. I mean, I do have some bugs every now and then. I do a lot of Twitter spaces, and my phone just gets extremely hot while I'm doing the Twitter spaces now, especially the bigger ones are the ones that last like a long time. So I have had some recent issues with that, and it's unfortunate because I think it's a good product.
Yeah.
But, I mean, obviously that's how a lot of Bitcoiners met, and then how a lot of information was passed back and forth. So, I think in one way, shape, or form, I hope that Twitter makes it, but it is kind of a point now where it's like, well, is one of the bigger social media platforms like globally going to fail? And then if it fails, like what's going to happen to that website or, app or whatever? I don't really know the answer to that question. It is kind of an interesting little thought experiment, but I do think, like you said, at the end of the day, I think that they'll make it. But I don't think that we'll look back on this like 20-ish, maybe 30-ish years from now and be like, wow, Amazon was really that big, or Google was really that big compared to, I don't know, XYZ company that's probably not even created just yet.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything you said there. I do think like the biggest threat that Nostr brings to these other like web, I guess they're like Web 2.0 companies, are like the Metas and the Twitters. I think those people should definitely be afraid of Nostr, because like Nostr is just what relays and public and private keys and like stuff like that. So to me, it just makes more sense that the ad model, the way we're looking at it now, is going to kind of go away and just going to get embedded with like sats of some sort. But I mean, we'll see. I want to switch gears though. Let's talk about the housing market. I mean, a lot of us plebs probably don't have their own house. Maybe they do. I don't know. I mean, if they save Bitcoin wisely, right? But inside your macro newsletter, you said that it'll stagnate in most cities because the price of rent and apartments will increase, or just in general. Can you just kind of expand on that?
Yeah, for sure. So the way that housing works generally is, there's a price in the market and there's buyers and sellers, whatnot, right? But you have to pay a mortgage 90% of the time. Like I'm sure majority of the plebs, unless you are, very in Bitcoin very, very early and you want to sell a bunch of Bitcoin, you're not able to buy a house all in cash. And so because of that, the housing price may go down or stagnate in cities like, I'm in Tampa, Florida, you're in Austin, and, Pleb Labs in Austin, and, Nashville, maybe some of the bigger, like quote unquote Bitcoin hubs will be fine because a lot of people moved to these locations and, were because of remote work, they stayed open, they did whatever, they were a little bit more friendly. They're a little bit more desirable places to live. So those housing prices will kind of stagnate, although, the Federal Reserve's kind of increasing interest rates. I know we kind of talked about that a little bit earlier, but as the Federal Reserve increases interest rates, generally speaking, personal mortgage interest rates increase as well. So say you have, I don't know, $100,000 house, and, that interest rate during COVID was, 2.5% to 3% or so. So that's, a very low interest rate, right? So you got to just think like, all right, that, I don't know, you borrowed $90,000 or so to purchase that house, and you're paying like 2.5%, 3%. So on that interest rate, you don't really need to pay it off that quickly, and your payment's probably relatively low. But, now you think about that house probably, doubled in value at the very least, or pretty damn close to it. Maybe went up to 150,000 in these past 2 years because housing just absolutely exploded. Well, not only did that house explode and go up extremely in value, but now that interest rate is not 2.5% to 3%. It's closer to 6 or 7%.
Oh, wow.
So, what you're paying on the monthly basis, like if you break down a mortgage, like I don't know, full transparency here. I own this home that I'm sitting in here right now, which I'm very lucky to do. But if you look down at the breakdown, right, I think I pay like close to $2,400 a month total with, I have a duplex, and I rent out some of it. So whatever, but just total expense is about 2,400. If you look at the breakdown, the overall portion of my payment that goes to principal and interest is about $700 worth of that. So about a third, or a little bit less than less than a third of that payment. Where the rest is taxes, insurance, interest, all that kind of stuff. So a very little amount of that payment is going towards, the amount that I borrowed. Where a lot of it, majority of that payment, I think like, my insurance and taxes are maybe like $100 to $200 a month or something like that. But majority of that payment is towards that interest. And so as that interest increases, that payment of that amount of that payment is going to increase as well. And so, the average person is going to be, hey, I'm looking at a house that's, I don't know, price, like I said before, $100,000. So if that payment before, like a couple years ago, was maybe, I don't know, $500, well, now that payment is probably closer to $1,000 or maybe even a little bit more. And so, the house prices didn't change in value, but the payment increased significantly. And because that payment increased significantly, while people are kind of breaking down their expenses and everything like that, they're unable to make that payment on a monthly basis. So what does that mean for people then? Hey, I was going to buy this house. A lot of people that I hear just anecdotally are like, you know what? It's not a great time to buy because the interest rates are so high, right? They think that the interest rates are going to go back down to the COVID level prices, which, to be full transparent, I don't think that we'll ever see interest rates really that low, maybe in our lifetime again.
Wow. Really, Brandon?
It's ripping and rolling. Yeah. I mean, I think like the Fed is going to kind of learn their lesson. They're not going to really keep it at 0% interest rates because of how much things were inflated at one point in time. I think that they're going to try to float it around 2 to 3%, in the future. But which means like mortgage rates will probably be good around 4 to 5% or so. But which is a slight difference than that 2.5 to 3%. But, it is a difference, right? And so because of that, a lot of people that were maybe first-time home buyers are trying to get into the market for the first time are planning on waiting this year. And so what does that mean? Hey, my lease is up in February. My lease is up in March. Well, I hear it's a bad time to buy a house. So I'm going to go rent. I want to be in here a little bit longer. I'll put off buying that house. Okay, so I'm putting off buying that house. So what does that mean? I'm going to go rent. So I'm going to either rent an apartment or rent some nicer home and give myself a little bit more space. And that means somebody that, generally speaking, has probably a good credit score or probably has a good source of income, or maybe it's a couple who has great dual income. Well, we're not prepared to buy just yet. We're going to put it off. So we're going to go to this nicer apartment complex. And we're going to be competing for those spots in, some of those desirable cities, or even in less desirable cities, because they're like, hey, we're going to try to time this housing market. We want to buy at a good time. So it's going to be more competition in rental markets, which means rent's going to go up. And rent has kind of continued to go up, all around the country, even when housing in certain areas has gone down. That's kind of my long-winded answer on the housing market, where I think some of the markets did get overinflated, maybe like in Austin, maybe in Nashville, maybe Miami, maybe even Tampa to a lesser extent. But I think, once they kind of hit, not a quote unquote bottom, but I don't think they're going down too much farther. I think just so many people are flocking to these cities, and, not only flocking to the cities, but, there's going to be more competition in the rental market everywhere. So, on top of all that, it's just going to mean rent is going to increase, which is unfortunate for the average person, because generally speaking, when rent increases, you have to wait like either a full year or something else to get that wage increase. So, that's kind of, I guess, my long-winded answer on the view of the housing / rental market. Yeah,
I think you hit it again. I think there's a lot of people, including myself, that was looking at purchasing a house like in 2021, 2022. And then it was obvious at that point. Like, I remember going to look at like these houses like up here, like by the Arboretum here in Austin. And we literally had to be like in a 15-minute interval competing with other outside, people looking as well, like from California, because everybody was moving in around 2021 and stuff. And I remember we also were looking at places like outside of Austin, like Copper's Cove or Manor. And there was just like a long list, just even like look at the place. And then like when we actually did look at the place, it was like extremely overvalued for what the actual property is, right? It's no secret that a lot of these houses here inside of Austin are just like, they look like your average everyday house. You can go on Zillow right now and look at it and just look at a regular house. And then you're like, they're like charging $500,000 for that property. And it's just like, what? It doesn't like me personally, like my uncle, he bought like a lot of house. He bought like 2 houses on the east side in the 90s. And guess how much they cost, Brandon?
Probably less than 100,000.
They were $20K a piece. They were $20K a piece. And now those same houses are going for like $750,000, which is like insane. It's insane. Like the amount of inflation that we're seeing. And yeah, man, what's going on?
It's a problem too, because, not only are we seeing people kind of flock to cities like Austin. I mean, my parents, they just sent me a text the other day. I think September of this year marks like 25 years or something where my parents have lived in Austin. And of course I lived there, growing up and everything like that as well. But I mean, it's just changed so much. But you're seeing a lot of people, like you said, from California or from New York or from some of these other cities just kind of flocking to Austin. And you got to think about some of these cities, right? Right. Like San Francisco, for example, right? The Bay Area, Silicon Valley. A lot of people are moving from there to Austin. Why is that? Well, hey, I bought this shack for, 300, 400, 500, 600, maybe even close to $1 million in San Francisco, during the Silicon Valley boom. All that housing got inflated, and it's mostly on borrowed money. So then I can sell that house, make, astronomical amounts of money, make multiple 6 figures, like $500,000-$600,000 worth just by selling my house. And I was just making the steady payments every month. And what do I have now? A shit ton of cash. So what can I do? Just go to Austin or some of these places like, hey, I want a new nicer than the house I lived in San Francisco or in New York City. It's bigger, but hey, like I'm paying $300,000 less. Well, what's an extra $50,000 to that person? They just, sold a house and they're making out like a bandit. They're like, all right, fuck it. I'll just throw an extra $50,000 at it. I'll throw an extra $100,000 at it. It doesn't matter. It was all inflated cash anyway. So it's all like monopoly money to these people, right? So I mean, that's the issue with the fiat system, is that we saw all these people just like, hey, I have remote work. I can live wherever the hell I want. I want to get the hell out of New York City. I'm tired of paying all these crazy taxes in California. So I'm going to move to Austin. I'm going to move to Nashville. I'm going to move to Florida. And what did that do? That just brought an influx of all these people selling their homes in all these locations that just had a shit ton of equity just lined up in it. So what did it do to the houses and all these places? Just jacked it up like crazy because of exactly like I said, they just had an influx of cash. So I mean, I was lucky enough to buy, in September 2020, where there was still a little bit of fear of COVID. So I got kind of lucky. But now, like I have like a shit ton of just built-in equity in the house. Like I put a little money into it, but to be honest, like I mean, I'm got very lucky with it too, just because of like all the inflated prices. And I mean, like you said, like your uncle, right? I mean, look at what he, the average investment over that period of time would not nearly be as great as what it is now. But I mean, now he could sell one or two of those, or one or both of those. Yeah. Or just hold on to them forever. And that guy's going to be like, once he wants to retire, he'll be sitting pretty, just like, the Daffy Duck gift, just walking down, counting his cash, man, or stacking extra sats or something with that,
Yeah. It's crazy, man. It's crazy. The state of the world right now, man. It's insane. And then you also outline kind of the stock market. I mean, a lot of us Bitcoiners or plebs don't really look at the stock market, but maybe we have a job where like it's on our 401k and we have no choice, right? To a certain extent. Like, what do you see just in that area? Just as far as like where that's going? Cause that's a whole, we kind of see like Bitcoin. I don't know your opinion. Is Bitcoin correlated with the stock market at all?
So unfortunately, as plebs do not want to admit it, it is kind of correlated with a lot of these growth in tech stocks. Unfortunately, I mean, it is getting a little bit to the point where it's like, hey, Google crashes or something, but Bitcoin's stagnant, or Bitcoin's like up a slight percent or something like that. But if you look at some of these, I guess like riskier, quote unquote, what FinTwit or the average financial professional would call risky. Some of these stocks, based on their volatility, Bitcoin is somewhat correlated with it, right? But the interesting thing about housing is it's usually not super volatile because you can't buy and sell, right away. Like it takes like at a minimum, 30 days to close, generally speaking. I know we saw kind of crazy things going on during COVID 2020, 2021. And I think that's kind of slowing down. But the stock market's very liquid. And so, we've seen a period of time where we had people kind of FOMOing into anything, right? So, I mean, it was either they're FOMOing into GameStop or AMC or Dogecoin or some of these other, shit cryptocurrency kind of things. And they're seeing their money just shoot up like crazy, right? 10xing whatever. All these influencer pump and dump random schemes left and right. Stock market's a little bit more regulated, but not super regulated. I mean, to the point where it doesn't stop all these kind of pump and dump schemes or whatever. But, I think I kind of outlined it a little bit earlier when it comes to these growth companies, right? Like we're seeing a lot of layoffs. They're trying to cut down expenditures, and it's going to be a lot of companies that are, trying to lower their CapEx expenditures, their bottom line, all that kind of stuff. But they're not going to be making as much revenue. And so that stock is, a lot of people like to value it like price to earnings is a very common, I guess, like Warren Buffett value investing kind of principle, where it's the price of the stock compared to how much they actually earn. So we saw during COVID, those price to earnings, like the joke was there's no price to earnings values too high, right? You're seeing 80 to 100 to multiple hundreds worth of price to earnings value. Like some companies weren't even making money, but they were valued at multi-billion-dollar corporations. Well, I think we're going to get kind of back to that original, I guess, value investing principles, where the stock market has been extremely overvalued for the past couple of years, even for before that too. But we're going to kind of see a reversion back to the mean. We've seen a lot of people just kind of FOMO in, do growth investing, do a lot of different of these strategies where they've just been killing the overall, I guess, quote unquote, value investing that Warren Buffett made his entire wealth on, where he, was getting crushed by people like Dave Portnoy and some of these other guys who would just go on, Twitter streams and whatnot and say stocks only go up. Well, there's a reason why, some people have like education, have been able to study and do a lot of these things towards it. Right. So, so I think like a lot of the valuations of stocks and companies are going to go down. But overall, like more people are kind of getting aware of the stock market, I guess, if that makes sense, where they're understanding like, hey, if I put my money in a savings account or I put it in something else, it's not going to be good. But if I put it in the stock market, hey, I might lose a little bit today, but long-term stocks always go up. That's the one positive, I guess, I saw that in COVID was people kind of became more aware, I guess, of their financial standing and everything like that. And so I think for overall this year, I think just like the stock market is just going to kind of go sideways. There's going to be some companies that are successful. There's going to be some that are doing very, very poorly. And those are the ones that probably just got super inflated over the past couple of years. But I think, just generally speaking, if you're looking at some of the general indexes like the NASDAQ or the S&P 500 or the Dow, those are going to be relatively flat throughout the entire year because we're just going to see some companies do sort of well, but not very many do outstanding. And we're going to see a lot of companies do, sort of poorly, and some do just extremely poorly. And so I think like just overall, companies in general are going to have maybe a quote unquote earnings recession where they're not going to be earning as much money. And so in turn, the stock prices aren't going to be valued as high.
Gosh, dude. it's looking bad out there. God, everything.
Yeah,
You
man,
think it's just? Do you think it's just the I guess the fallout of COVID still that we're kind of passing through us, that we're like smelling out there? Like, what do you, or is it just like the state of the world? What do you really? Can you pinpoint this anywhere? It's just
yeah. I think it's kind of a combination of things.
Yeah.
So I think the global economy was kind of hurting a little bit in 2018, 2019. But, it was ripping and roaring for so long that a little bit of a slowdown, nobody really noticed it too much. Well, COVID drastically accelerated that, right? So, I mean, you can't shut down the entire global
dumbest
economy.
move ever, dude. Dumbest move of all time, right?
Yeah, you can't. You just can't do that, right? I mean, and expect everything to be peaches and daisies, right? So, I mean, but then, you on top of all that, you inject a shit ton of money just into the market, and on the basis of really nothing, and you delay this response, right? So it's kind of kicking the can down the road. And because they did that and they didn't raise interest rates right away, they're kind of having to shock the system right now. And they're raising interest rates at a historic pace. And because of that, we're seeing like a lot of like multiple thousands of layoffs at some of these companies. And we're going to see, a lot of people just having to get tighter with their money, right? Because like I said, like not only is rent increasing, expenses increasing, like inflation increasing, the price of like almost everything. Like if you leave your house, you're spending probably double the amount of what you used to spend just to leave your house, right? With gas and just food and everything else. And so, because of that, people still got to make some money. So we're seeing, inflation on goods and services, and, minimum wage is a really common topic right now, right? Like a lot of people want to raise that minimum wage from $7.25 to $15. Well, what do you think the margin is on a $1 big double at McDonald's? It's not very high, right? Yeah. So a lot of these big chain companies, the reason why they're successful is because everybody knows a McDonald's, right? Obviously, it's shit food for you, and I don't recommend eating there at all. But you could go to a McDonald's. You can go to, they have these automated cashiers now, so they're eliminating the cashier expense. And I saw that they're starting to make McDonald's fully automated, so they don't have to pay a single person. Well, why are they doing that? Because the workers are getting too expensive. Right. So in order to make ends meet on the building that they have to pay for, the lights to keep on, to pay the cook, to pay the cashier, to pay all these people, they have to sell, hundreds and hundreds of McDoubles, or maybe even thousands throughout the day, in order to break even, or even like make a little bit of profit. Well, take that to a lesser extent where you can't buy in bulk to the average mom and pop shops. Right. So you think your local businesses, or your business is just starting up. Right. Like in Texas, right. There's Mighty Fine Burgers, right. Great, outstanding hamburgers, right. If you've been to Austin. So why is a Mighty Fine Burger probably 3-4 times the amount of, McDonald's burger? Not only is it a little bit thicker, but, there's not as many locations. They probably pay their workers a little bit more than they pay at McDonald's, and they can't order the food necessarily as much as in bulk as a McDonald's can. And if they, have food that goes bad or something like that, that's a little bit more detrimental to that business than it is to a McDonald's, right? That has, millions of locations around the world. So, that's where like we saw COVID kind of hit small businesses pretty hard. And, I know people are like, well, it's small business this, small business that. Well, I mean, over 50% of the jobs in the United States are from small businesses. So it's not only the restaurant industry, it's a lot of these other small businesses that, have other, I guess, niches. It's just the restaurant industry is kind of the most, I guess, visual to most people, right? You drive around, you have your favorite restaurant, your favorite mom and pop shop down the street. During COVID, it got shut down, and now you'll never see it again. Right. And that's unfortunate, but, I think back to your question, the combination of shutting down the global economy, printing a shit ton of money, and not tightening interest rates a little bit earlier, and going through all these kind of things, it just was like the perfect cocktail for a huge, recession. So the Fed essentially right now is trying to shock the system, and they're destroying kind of, I guess, the global offshore dollar market, which I've talked about with, Phil Gibson on Twitter quite a bit. And we kind of share the same opinion, is that the Fed, is getting kind of sick of, I guess, this global market where everything's connected at some way, shape, or form, right? You're getting oil from Russia or some of these other countries, and then they kind of have control of you now based on, the global dependence on everything. Well, I think, one thing that COVID kind of showed is that this global economy doesn't really work when you have, when everybody's not necessarily cooperating. And, there's like a global shutdown like the coronavirus or something like that. So I think there's going to be a movement towards maybe more of, I guess, a nationalistic society where more countries are going to be more self-sustained and everything like that. So I think that's going to be one positive that comes out of it. And the US is a little bit more primed for success than any other country, just because one, we have the global reserve currency. So I think I think unfortunately, I don't think 2023 is going to be like that great of a year for, any asset. But I mean, at the end of the day, I also think it's a great time for building businesses. I mean, obviously Bitcoin, Twitter, and whatever is big on bear markets are great for building and everything like that, which I do honestly think that is a great time for things like that. But long-winded answer. I think, it's just kind of like the perfect cocktail that's making for, a not good situation globally.
Yeah. I'm kind of, it's depressing. It can be depressing if you think you think a lot about it. I know this is what you do. You spend a lot of your time looking at this stuff. So it's good to get your insight on it, because a lot of things that you're bringing up right now, I really am not, to be 100% truthful here, I'm not really paying attention to. And that's literally what it comes down to. It's just informing the masses. So Bitcoin passed 20K, I guess a week ago. We barely got over 20K. How closely do you follow Bitcoin as far as like, maybe not an investment vehicle, but like where do you see it kind of headed this year? Are you paying attention to that at all?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it is a little bit of a bear market run up right now with Bitcoin. So I think, maybe we've hit the bottom. I'm not much in like, I guess, a price prediction kind of guy. I do follow the price, of course, because I think, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, I think it's, as much as we don't want to follow the price, especially in the bear market, right? I mean, it's so much fun to be on Twitter when it's running up, everybody's posting the memes and all this kind of stuff. But, in the bear market, it's not as fun to follow the price, because it's like, all right, we're all poor again. But, I think it's important to follow for some of these businesses, especially for the miners, right? Because we're seeing a lot of miners that, had a lot of exposure to Bitcoin. And, that's kind of an interesting way of looking at things. I know that, a lot of these companies, maybe they held a lot of the Bitcoin they were mining because maybe it was like for popularity on Twitter and other things like that. But, I think like back to your question, a lot of what I look at the price, I think, it'll be maybe relatively stable. I think it'll go up a little bit. I don't think we're going to see a new all-time high this year. Maybe we'll see a little bit more dips here or there, but I think, Bitcoin's going to be kind of steadily going on the up. And I think like towards the end of this year too, is like when we're going to kind of start to see the run up, because I think, overall the Federal Reserve is raising interest rates throughout the year. I think that they're going to start to slow it down here soon. We have a Fed meeting next week, which will be interesting to see.
Oh, do we?
Yeah. So that
what typically happens in one of these meetings, just so the audience knows?
Yeah, for sure. So the Fed meets, they discuss what they want to do with like the interest rate policy and all this other stuff. So what they look at are, CPI, some of these other metrics, right? And they try to decide like, hey, are we going to raise interest rates? If we're going to raise interest rates, how much? So they've been continually raising by 75 basis points, which is like 0.75%. So it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you kind of continually do that over time, it is, they're doing it at a historic pace, right? So there's a lot of debate going on in FinTwit right now on how much the Fed is going to raise in this next meeting, whether it's 50 basis points or 25. The market right now has priced in 25. But if you listen to Jerome Powell and kind of what he says, he's always been saying, like, I'm not going to stop till the job's done. I'm not going to stop. There's going to be more pain and all this and that. So we've seen a lot of, maybe growth companies or startups lose a lot of jobs, but we haven't really seen like a lot, like in unemployment skyrocket just yet. It also is a lagging indicator. So we're not going to see, I guess, the true unemployment numbers for probably like a couple months down the road. But, I'm under the impression that the market is just kind of being a little hopeful right now. The market's going to, they want the Fed to pivot, because once there's any sign of pivot or slowdown, the stock market's going to shoot up. And same with the price of Bitcoin. And so because of that, I think that, and I truly think that the Fed doesn't really care about the stock market or anything like that. So I think Jerome Powell is going to keep raising, and I think he's going to do it by 50 basis points, which I could be wrong on the next one. But I think, 50 basis points at the very least in the next one, maybe 25 the one after. And then
so he's not going back down. He's never pulling back. He's only increasing at this point.
For the rest of this year, he's not going to pull back. The Fed's initial target rate was like 7%, and I think they're at like 3.75 right now. So my theory is that they're going to kind of continue to raise interest rates through the end of the year, and maybe pause towards the end of the year, like Q3, Q4 time. And once they pause, that's when we'll kind of start to see the Bitcoin price run up
a little bit more.
Yeah. But then 2024. Coincidentally, around election time, we'll probably see them start to pull back, and that's when maybe we'll see some things like Bitcoin and some stocks and housing start to rip and roar. And will inflation be completely gone and fixed by that? No. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't think the Fed or anybody. I think the secret's out now, right? The plebs know, like, hey, once they've raised these prices on certain goods and services, they're not going back down, right? I mean, like, all right, you go to your oil change or whatever it was, used to be $100, now it's $125. Well, just because everything like, gas got cheaper or something else, like that oil, the Jiffy Lube or whatever you go to is not lowering the price back to $120, back to $100. They're keeping it at $125.
Yeah, it only increases.
Yeah. Exactly. So, I mean, like a lot of these companies, like whatever it is, goods and services are still going to be up in elevated prices. They just might not be raising quite as quick as they have over this past year or so, which would be a good sign if people's like wages increase at that pace. But I don't think that's really the case, unfortunately. So, long story short, I think Bitcoin's going to be, relatively flat throughout this year. Maybe we'll see a run up. Maybe we'll see, 25K or so now here, but then we'll see a little drawback. But I think, we're not going to get too much higher than 30, 35K by the end of the year. And 2024 will probably be the year that we see it start to rip and roar.
Yeah. It's interesting that you said that, because most people don't realize that, right? When they increase, they tighten, when the Fed tightens or increases, everything goes up in price, right? You have to adjust for, the expenses, the infrastructure, the cost of your workers, all that kind of stuff, right? It all increases, and then you adjust the prices to fit that model. And then when like you said, when the money comes back into the system, like there's no going back. like I mean? Like it's not going to go back. It's going to stay the same. So when people are complaining about like, oh, eggs are like $8 or $9, well, it's like, well, get used to it. Like this is the time that we're in.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, all right, well, maybe it's like $8 or $9, and then we'll see it come back to $6, $7. It's like, oh, thank God, eggs are $6, $7, not realizing that like, last year they were $3 to $4. It's going to be something like that. Like if we see like just a little pullback, it's not going to be anything dramatic, but because, the prices were so elevated, you're going to be like, oh, thank God, prices of eggs have dropped $1 or $2, and it's unfortunate that it's kind of how it is, but you're already seeing it with the way, I mean, not to get political or anything, but the way that, the president and the president's spokesperson is talking about gas, right? So
yeah, what are they saying? I'm not paying attention to that. What are they saying?
Yeah, so like gas prices like 4 years ago were like around $2 or something,
Yeah.
$2.50. And then they're like just under $4 now per gallon in certain areas, maybe 3.50 depending on where you're at. So now they're talking about how gas prices have lowered in the past year, like I don't know, 80% or, not 80%, but, a big percentage, or they're lowering by $1, which is giving Americans, a couple $100 per month. And they're throwing out these numbers like, hey, the average American is saving $100 a month now on their oil or on their fuel prices because the gas prices went from $4.50 to $4. Well, it's like, gas was like $2.50 like 2 years ago. Like, what are we even talking about here? But they're trying to change that narrative where it's like, hey, we're doing the best we can. We're helping you out here, and we're lowering the gas prices from $4.50 to $4. And then they're trying to point the fingers at, these gas station companies, saying that the gas station companies are, deploying or are, gouging the prices and all these kind of things. When in reality, it's, inflation, and there's obviously a lot more back ends that go into the oil and gas industry. But, that's just kind of back of the napkin kind of explanation there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, yeah.
It's crazy, man. It's crazy. I think it's going to be, I honestly think it's going to be a big banner year for mining just in general. I think we're going to see a lot of big companies like Intel and some of these bigger like manufacturers come in, and we're going to see a lot of that money come into the system. I think that's going to be really cool. I think Lightning is just going to keep taking off the way it is. I think Nostr is going to start onboarding a lot more Lightning devs and Lightning plebs and just like everybody out there. I think we're going to see a lot of that. But what's interesting to me is just the amount of information that you provide, man, on a weekly basis. Green Candle Investments. God.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. But I mean, hey, on the bright side, I agree with you there with mining, right? So I think a lot of companies are going to see like, hey, with all this inflation, I need to figure out how to use excess energy, right? Or maybe I heat an office building, or I do something like that. Well, like paying for heating this office building is way more expensive than, I'd like it to be. Well, why don't we heat this office building with Bitcoin miners? Or, we have some of this excess energy, or we have, maybe a running creek on our office building land or something like that. So why don't we mine Bitcoin on there? I think there's going to be a lot of companies looking for ways to get a little bit extra money. And I think mining is going to be a big way for that. I think there's going to be a lot of developments in the home mining space where it's like, using the excess heat for something, whether it's like, a greenhouse or aquaponics or something like that. So, I hear guys like Hashing the Heating. So shout out to him on Twitter. A lot of these guys who are using the heat from the miners and developing, unique ways to kind of utilize that and, make money on it. Right. And so I think in the mining space, it's going to be really interesting seeing a lot of companies either, capturing that excess energy or utilizing the heat put off by a lot of these Bitcoin miners, because they're like, hey, we're going to pay for this anyway, or we're losing energy on this. So the price doesn't necessarily matter as much, because a lot of these miners that strictly depend on the price of Bitcoin, we're seeing it. It's a tough model. It's a tough business to be just strictly a Bitcoin miner. So I think we're going to see a lot of innovation there. And then the thing that jacks me up a bunch is, a lot about, Lightning, like you said, right? I mean, we're seeing a lot of small businesses hurt. Well, where's an easy way to kind of eliminate some of that expenses, eliminate that 3% expense from Visa, MasterCard, and all these, kind of general legacy financial systems. Once we do that, hey, you eliminate that, you save 3% of your business by just going onto Lightning. And what does that do? It gives you free marketing, whether you use something like Oshi or one of these other companies, Ibex Pay, some of these other things that are making it a lot easier for you to utilize Bitcoin. And, then instead of that business bleeding significantly, it stops it just for a little bit, right? I mean, of course, they're going to need a little bit more help than that. So obviously go help your small businesses where you can, and try to onboard them with Bitcoin, because I think, Lightning is a huge innovation for, an extremely, extremely inflationary time that we're in right now.
Yeah, definitely. The Sats back thing is just crucial at this point. And then just a lot of just like the webhooks and the APIs that are interconnected with streaming Sats now at this point. It's the opportunity for different types of businesses and microservices are there right now, and it's just going to keep growing at an alarming rate. We're already seeing, some bigger companies kind of look at the electricity that could be ran through the Lightning Network. I know it sounds nuts, but I mean, there's room there for things like that. I think I think it was maybe like 2 years ago. There was some guy that I met that was talking about like river turbines to like, do this hashing power or whatever. And then now it's like Africa is doing it, right? Like it's kind of cool. Like you're seeing a lot of the cutting edge stuff that was being talked about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, to now actually being deployed out into the masses or to a small little community. And I think right now what we're seeing with the microservices connections and like how Lightning and Nostr are all going to be interconnected, and seeing people rethink of like what this Web 5, Web 3 narrative is going to be. And we're realizing that it's moving in just a totally different direction, but Lightning's at the heart of it. So,
100%. Yeah. We haven't seen anything like this before, right? I mean, we see small businesses kind of had the quote unquote innovation with PayPal, where it was like PayPal was taking 3, 4, 5% to do online businesses. But now we have like Venmo and other things where it's like, hey, like, it's going to take 1 to 3 business days, or you're going to have to pay a fee. Well, hey, you can now get that instantly, cover your expenses, and do all of that, for little to no fee through Lightning. And I mean, I think that's just huge, right? And, we've got like a big issue with credit card fraud and other things like that, where, essentially the whole world is just run on credit and debt right now. Well, Lightning helps you, it gives you the ability to, finalize that transaction and do it seemingly instantly. And
final settlement, baby.
Yeah,
final settlement. It's awesome. It's one of those things I love working inside the lab, seeing all those new stuff that these guys are coming up with. Like it's just insane. Like I just would never have thought of it, or even remotely even question that could be a possibility. We have a guy inside the lab right now trying to build a new operating system around Bitcoin, which just sounds crazy. Like it just sounds insane. But when you like, he starts talking about it, it's like, oh wait, maybe. But it's like people need a place to experiment on these like bigger cutting edge ideas. I'm very blessed in that respect. Yeah. So where can people find you, Brandon? Like, let us know what the plebs can do to support Green Candle Investments.
State of Bitcoin. That's anywhere you get podcasts. I prefer to plug the Fountain, but use it on the Fountain app. Obviously, you don't have to stream your stats or anything if you find value in it, whatnot. But yeah, most active on Twitter at Green Candle IT. And then I have the Macro Insights pod, where it gives a little bit more of I guess just like macro view. I try to avoid talking about Bitcoin or crypto or anything like that on that show. And then I have, like I said, State of Bitcoin. And then I write a newsletter. I'm not as active on the newsletter as I was in the past year. I try to put out like 1 or 2 a week.
That's pretty active.
Yeah. I mean, I was pretty consistent for a while where I put, 2 out a week every week, but, definitely get 2 podcasts, Macro Insights every Monday, State of Bitcoin's live stream Thursday, and then audio is put out Friday. So this week I got an NFL player. His name is Vince Beagle. He's coming on. He's a linebacker who was tweeting out about some Bitcoin meetups that he wants to meet during the bear market. So I tweeted at him and getting him on. I'm seeing the status of a lot of these NFL players who got in, right? Like when they were FOMOing in, taking a shit ton of their salary in Bitcoin. So I'm seeing what the vibe is still with in the NFL about Bitcoin. So it should be an interesting conversation. So be sure to check that one out. And man, I'm pretty active, open everywhere. So I'll be traveling to a bunch of conferences too. So hopefully we meet in person.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, for sure. I can't wait to hang out with you in person. We have mutual friends out there in the space. So yeah, man, thanks for coming on the show. I can't wait, because I think eventually, we can do this on a quarterly basis. It'd be cool to get a little macro talk and for the plebs.
Yeah, man, I'm always down, dude. I'm always down. I love to. Obviously, I guess I might like to hear my own voice way too much as I do a lot of these talking things. But I love to have conversations with fellow plebs and just talk about this stuff, because I think what you're doing is great, and I think the macro perspective, as much as we maybe don't want to talk about it too much because there's a lot of cool things being developed. It's all intertwined at the end of the day. So I think it's important to be aware of it for sure.
Absolutely.
Sunday nights that you wanna, like velvet cake, sweetheart can bargain, F-price mistakes. She will go down with her ship like a good captain. You're sitting on the dock paying for an audience of one. Linoleum floors. Get a call from an old friend who said never liked them before. He would drive all over 3 lanes. You sit tight shotgun. Windshield wipers waving for an audience of one. You came out from the country wearing mama's clothes. You were born in the city with daddy's dominoes.